Rob. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Hope you're feeling better. For those who know you or may follow you on social media, one of the things that you are passionate about is using money as a force for good. And you have led many high-profile discussions regarding financial health, family, legacy, and the importance of creating financial well-being in a world worth living in. Could you please provide us with some insight into what this means to you?
Yeah, well, look, firstly, good morning. And I was just reflecting on Daniel's talk. I mean, wasn't Daniel amazing? So firstly, thank you, Daniel, for joining us from Atlanta at 4:30 in the morning. And I was just reflecting, so I'm isolating at home. I tested COVID with COVID on Sunday night. So although I'm at home, I haven't seen my kids or wife since Sunday morning. I FaceTime with my wife, even though we're in the same house. So it's only been a few days, but I'm certainly feeling the impact of isolation. The good news is I've had my breakfast, so hopefully my decision making is up. But you asked me about financial well-being in a world worth living in, and for me, one of the key challenges, and I absolutely agree with Daniel, is that the trick is we've got to expect the unexpected. You know, we weren't expecting me to have COVID and not to be here today, and yet we had a plan B. My colleague was going to step in just in case. Luckily, we were able to make this work. But when it comes to your sort of financial well-being, I always think there are two parts. There's financial resilience and there's financial well-being. But by financial resilience, I mean, do you just have enough money set aside in case an emergency happens? So for a lot of people, you may have lost your job or your means of earning money over the last year or 2 years. Do you have enough money set aside that enables you to carry on living even though you're not earning any money? And certainly research in the UK shows that 50% of all mental health issues are typically to do with money and indebtedness. And typically one of the number one causes of divorce is also issues around money. The second reason why having that kind of rainy day fund is so important is that is what protects you emotionally from when the market falls by 20 or 30%. So in March 2020, when the market was falling the fastest and sharpest it had ever fallen, if you have a long-term plan, if you've looked at that picture of your kids, I love that story, and you're investing for the long term in decades, not days, then actually you carried on investing, and having money set aside meant that you stopped yourself from having that fight or flight risk that Daniel talked about. And although it feels like you're being chased by a tiger when the market is falling, you know that actually the best thing is to carry on investing. And those that have done that will have seen a massive impact on their financial resilience. I think the third thing I want to talk about, and I talked about this last year, is that we're all living longer. This idea of 100-year life. The number of centenarians in the world, that's people aged over 100, is about 573,000. And that's double from what it was 10 years ago. And it is doubling every 10 years. In fact, in Singapore, I think the number of centenarians has increased 20-fold in the last 30 years. So on average, we're all living longer, and we need to prepare for that. And on this point, I want to introduce a concept called the good ancestor. Daniel talked about our past and what drives our brains and how we're wired. But there's this Maori concept from New Zealand called whakapapa, which is this idea that we're all connected to our past and our future selves. And that's why that story about looking at the picture of your kids is so important, is if we start thinking about our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, it takes us well into the next century and beyond. Think about it. The Queen in the UK, when her youngest great-grandchildren die, will be 200 years after she was born. So imagine thinking with a 200-year mindset. On that kind of trajectory, we know that the world we live in is not a good one. It's hard to imagine 2050, but 2050 is closer than 1990. And we know that right now, human activity means that we're on track to trash the planet, and we need to change that. The good news is the technology exists. We just need to change our behaviors. And so when it comes to investing, not only do we need to think about return to beat inflation, and I want to talk about inflation briefly, we need to think about the risk that we're taking, but we also need to think about the impact that our money is having. What impact are those companies having in the short, medium, and long term on the environment, on the people, the communities who work with them, and is that sustainable? And by the way, that feeds directly back into the return. And then on financial well-being, Daniel talked about one of the challenges we now face is we have to take risk. And the challenge we face is that inflation, we don't really feel it day to day or week to week. But over the last 20 years, I think, in Hong Kong, you've probably seen, 100 Hong Kong dollars 20 years ago is probably worth 70 Hong Kong dollars today. In Singapore, it's probably worth 75 Hong Kong dollars. So 25 to 30% decrease in what you can buy with your money. In the UK, it's been even greater, actually. It's been about half. So, £100 20 years ago is only worth about £50 today in terms of what you can buy. And so if we live in this world where we're all living longer, and we've got this sort of silent threat of inflation, it's really important that we invest our money, because otherwise the one thing we do know is in the future our money will be worth less and we'll be able to buy less with it. And growing our wealth to protect against that is absolutely key.
That's great. And actually, you talked about inflation risk, and let's talk a little bit more about this, given that this is rather topical, as just last week, US headline inflation rate actually hit 6.2%, the highest in 30 years for US. Something that perhaps that also not many people are privy to. You grew up in Argentina yourself, where you experienced hyperinflation firsthand as a child. So could you tell us a little bit more about this phase of your life and how this had an impact on your, I guess, passion for investing and protecting and growing wealth for financial well-being?
Yeah, so I was about 7 and we moved to Argentina in the 80s, which wasn't obvious for a young British family to move to Argentina after the Falklands War. But I used to remember going shopping with my mum and dad, and you'd run around the supermarket and try and buy the goods before the price changed. So prices changed every day. And so if you were able to buy something before the price change, you could buy it at that price. In fact, inflation was running at 30% a month. And just to sort of explain to you just how much inflation was, if I took my dad's salary when we got to Argentina in January 1985, and then I looked at what that same salary would have bought him 4 years later, was one postage stamp. So that was the amount of inflation there was. Literally in 4 years, his salary went from being able to provide for all of us as a family to only being able to pay for a postage stamp. I'm not sure why. There's a lot of background.
There's a bit of feedback. In any case, yep. Let's move on nonetheless. Thank you. That was interesting. We talked a little bit about this. We talked quite a lot about this actually. So at St. James's Place, long-term investing is one of our core principles. Now, naturally, the earlier that we begin on this journey, the more of a head start towards financial well-being we obtain. With that said, though, finances can be very complicated even for adults. So when it comes down to financial education, is there such thing as too young?
Well, that's what I was going to try and say. So what my experience in Argentina taught me was that money wasn't safe. So my parents gave me a real sense that you had to earn money, but you had to keep hold of money. And when inflation is so high, and the idea that your money can decrease by 30% in just 1 month, keeping hold of your money is really challenging. I actually didn't learn about growing your money until I started my career in finance. So I started working at Deutsche Bank and at Merrill Lynch, and this idea that you could invest your money in companies, you could invest in the stock market and grow your wealth and prosperity. There is no too early. Research done in 2013 by Cambridge University showed that our money saving habits, and that's the key word, are formed by the age of 7. So this is our ability to delay gratification. This is our ability to separate wants from needs. And so, I actually 5 years ago wrote a children's book called Save Your Acorns to enable parents to read to their children about the importance of saving and investing, except it's just told through a parable about these squirrels and the bears and the monkeys. And so hopefully when you read it with your kids, you can then have a conversation about what the acorns mean and what they learn. So the truth is you can't start too young, and actually financial education, I think, should be a lifelong lesson that we teach. Unfortunately, it only got put on the secondary school syllabus in the UK in 2014, and it's still not on the primary school syllabus. And yet in the US, we know that states which deliver financial education versus those that don't have higher levels of saving and lower levels of indebtedness. So there is increasing evidence around the positive impact that financial education can have on our future financial decision making, and therefore our, as we heard from Daniel earlier, our kind of mental well-being.
Indeed. And a sound financial education allows an investor to consider, I guess, the impact that they want to have. But impact, though, is a pretty broad term that can mean many, many things. So what do you think of when considering what impact you want to have, both as an investor, but also as the individual responsible for the investment proposition at St. James's Place with over $200 billion of client assets invested?
Yeah, so look, when I think about investing for me and my family, I want to ensure that my money is doing two things really. One is it's giving me financial well-being, and the other is it's giving me a world worth living in. And so by the financial well-being, I need to ensure that I'm growing my wealth faster than inflation, that I'm building up enough money to support me when I decide to stop working and support me for that 100-year life. So it's crucial that I'm saving and investing for my future. So that's financial well-being. But a world worth living in, it's pretty simple, really. If in 2050, when I'm in my 70s and my daughters are in their 30s, if we've trashed the planet, what's the point in living in that world? One of the amazing things of the last 100 years is that we're all living longer. That's been incredible. One of the other things is really up until now, every generation has been wealthier than the one before. So economic prosperity has been improving from generation to generation, albeit it might be that this is the first generation or the youngest generation that are alive today, maybe the first generation that aren't as wealthy as their parents. However, if we measure prosperity not by GDP or economics or money, but US dollars or anything else, sadly we have destroyed our planet. In the 40 years since I was born, we now have half the flora and fauna that exist on the planet. There are less elephants, there are less whales, there are less sharks. We're destroying one football field of rainforest every single minute. We are literally destroying nature, and that is down to us and how we act. And what we know when it comes to investing, Daniel talked about exploring the world through how we invest our money. We just need to change the way that our companies act. We know that the future success of companies is dependent on their impact on people and planet, and vice versa. We know that the planet and the communities are impacted by the companies, either that people choose to work for or consume from, or their impact on the environment. So we've got this really closely correlated interaction. And so when it comes to investing, I want to make sure that I'm achieving three things: that for the risk I'm taking, I'm generating the right level of return to grow my money faster than inflation over decades, not days. But I also want to make sure that it's driving positive action, that those companies are not having a negative impact, and ideally are driving positive impact to the world in which I want to live in, and that I want my children to live in, and I want my grandchildren to live in. When it comes to my role as director of investments, one of the things that I feel incredibly privileged is the size and scale. You talked about how I'm responsible for $200 billion. And the cool thing is that for all of the people on this call, if you're saving $200, $300 a month for your pension or for your future self, that money gets pulled together into sort of $1 billion, $2 billion a month. And that's invested in $200 billion. And that $200 billion is invested across all of our fund managers around the world, which is about $9 trillion. and that's invested across 13,000 equities and bonds and properties around the world, worth about $90 trillion. So the policies, the impacts, the decisions we make have real impact on those businesses and how they interact. And so there's a real force multiplier effect, which I think is amazing in terms of impact.
Great. So talking about some of these impact, and of course, we've talked about how much the impact would have on, with the investment. And indeed, one of a recent study that we commissioned at St. James's Place Asia found that 2/3 of our potential clients in Hong Kong and Singapore actually said that they actively seek information regarding ESG and sustainability credentials before investing. But the other side of it, I guess, is particularly in today's world where there's abundance of information and so much flow of conflicting information, and that can be extremely overwhelming. So how do you go about deciphering and understanding this to make informed and balanced investment decisions?
Yeah, no, great question, Angelina. And I think, certainly a common term is sort of greenwashing. So how do you know that who you're investing with isn't greenwashing? I suppose, like in everything in life, there are a number of standards that you can look up and check. So I think the first and the baseline is what's called UNPRI, which stands for the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing. This is a sort of kite mark that you have to sign up to as a fund manager, as a wealth manager, that says that you are integrating environmental, social, and governance into your process. So, firstly, are they a member of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing? Again, you can Google that, look up the company name, and see if they're on the register. Second thing is you can always find out what rating they are. So, SJP is A+, and 63% of our fund managers are rated A+. So, even within that, there are different ratings. I suppose, having just come back from Glasgow and COP26, the second thing is, are they part of what's called GFANZ, which is the Glasgow Financial Alliance of Net Zero? So that's asset managers, asset owners, insurance companies, and banks. SJP signed up last year. We were actually the first wealth manager globally to sign up when there was only $5 trillion in the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. That's now over $10 trillion. And now that forms over $130 trillion that is aligned with investing for a net zero world. So again, you can look up to see if the asset manager, the wealth manager, the insurance company is a member of GFANZ. So those are sort of two simple things that you could do. We do have clients who obviously work in this space who really know their stuff, and they want to know, well, what more do you do? And I suppose two things that I'm proud about what SJP is part of. One is we're part of Climate Action 100+. And one of the ways that we believe in addressing the problem is through engagement. Turns out that of the thousands of companies on the planet, 100 of those are responsible for 70% of our emissions. Oil and gas companies, mining companies, etc. And so we engage through Climate Action 100+ with those companies to ensure that those businesses transition to a net zero world. Because the easiest thing in the world would, Angelina, be for you as CIO in Asia or me to simply sell a company and then buy another one. So whereas we don't think that's the right thing to do. We think the right thing to do is engage with that company and make it better. So a great example is Shell, Royal Dutch Shell. In January, through Climate Action 100+, we actually got them to sign up to net zero. In April, when they made their net zero commitments, we voted against them. We don't think they'd gone far enough. And then they subsequently revised them to a 45% reduction in CO2 by 2035. And our fund managers continue today to engage with Shell and raise that bar. The other area that we really try and make sure that we are best in class is on stewardship and engagement. And for those clients interested, you can go on our website and download our stewardship and engagement report. We update that annually. But earlier this year, we appointed Robeco, who are probably the world's, the leading firm in stewardship and engagement, and they support us again on how we engage with the companies in our fund managers' portfolios.
Great, thanks, Rob. Sorry about bear with us. You okay? Okay, I'm going to continue in any case. Thank you. So, Rob, what is your, I guess, final guidance on our audience today, who perhaps are considering their own impact and how to achieve this, particularly through investment?
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of things. So I was thinking about this actually. The reality is, I still think we have a responsibility as consumers. So, you know, what we eat, what we wear, how much we consume makes a difference. The second thing is, as citizens, you know, holding our politicians to account on net zero commitments and other commitments is hugely important. So, you know, if we're fortunate enough to live in a country where we get a democratic vote, how we respond as citizens is huge. In the communities we operate in, we can make a difference. So, you know, when I've got two young girls, the school we go, how we interact with our communities makes a big difference. But as you heard, 100 companies make 70% of world CO2 emissions. So how we engage with those companies, how we get the companies we work for to interact makes a huge difference. One of the things I like to tell people in the UK is, if you don't know where your pension is invested, contact your HR department and find out, is your pension invested responsibly? What are their policies around this? How are they thinking about net zero? What commitments have they made? Because the amazing thing is, you know, research done by Nordea shows that if you invest your pension in a sustainable and responsible style of investing for over 40 years, that's 27 times more impactful than flying less, eating less red meat, and cycling to work. So I suppose the key message is that how your money is invested makes a real difference. If you don't know how your money is invested, I suppose my number one call to action would be go and find out, speak to your HR department, find out about where your pension is invested. You know, if you're an SJP client, and if you don't know, definitely speak to your SJP partner and learn about all of the stuff that we do on your behalf to make sure that your money is delivering financial well-being in a world worth living in.
Thank you, Rob. I always really enjoy hearing your views and stories and love how passionate you are about making a difference. I'd like now to welcome back Johanna to the screen. Johanna and I are going to develop this discussion and take a deeper look at how ignoring short-term noise and focusing on longer-term goals can produce sustainable returns for investors.